The moment I struck the match against the weathered barnwood behind my farmhouse in rural Jefferson County, Colorado, I had no idea that within the next hour, 17 cars would be screaming down my gravel driveway like I had just announced plans to detonate a nuclear device. But that is exactly what happened. My name is Patrick Lawson, and I had owned my 23-acre property on the outskirts of Boulder for exactly 8 months when this entire situation exploded. I had moved out here from my cramped Denver apartment specifically to escape the noise, the crowds, and most importantly, people who felt entitled to tell me what to do with my own life. The irony of what was about to unfold was not lost on me, even in the moment. I had spent 3 weeks planning this controlled burn. My land had accumulated years of dead brush, fallen timber, and overgrown scrub that created a genuine fire hazard. The previous owner had let the property go to hell, and Colorado's dry climate meant that all this tinder was basically a wildfire waiting to happen. So I did what any responsible landowner would do. I researched the proper procedures, contacted the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, filled out the necessary paperwork with the local fire department, paid my fees, and received my official controlled burn permit. Everything was legal, documented, and approved by the actual authorities who had jurisdiction over such matters. What I had failed to account for was the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Now, you might be wondering how an HOA had anything to do with my property, considering I lived on a sprawling piece of land that was definitely not part of any suburban development. That confusion would be entirely reasonable. The answer was both simple and completely insane. About 2 years before I purchased property, a developer had bought up several parcels of land adjacent to mine and built a cookie-cutter neighborhood of identical beige houses with identical beige fences and identical beige attitudes. Meadowbrook Estates, they called it. Population roughly 200 families, all packed into quarter-acre lots like sardines in a very expensive can. The HOA for Meadowbrook Estates was run by a woman named Deborah Finch, and Deborah had apparently decided that her authority extended beyond the actual boundaries of her development and into the surrounding area through sheer force of will and entitlement. I had received exactly one letter from her about a month after moving in, informing me that my property was adjacent to an HOA-governed community and that I should take care to maintain appropriate standards. I had promptly used that letter to start a fire in my fireplace and thought nothing more of it until today. I was carefully setting controlled burns to small sections of cleared area when I heard the first car. Then the second. Then what sounded like an entire convoy. I looked up from my work, confused, and saw a stream of vehicles pouring onto my property like some kind of suburban invasion force. They parked haphazardly across my driveway, on my lawn, even blocking my barn entrance. Car doors started slamming, and suddenly I was surrounded by at least 40 people, all talking at once, many of them on their phones, several pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal. At the center of this chaos stood Deborah Finch herself. She was exactly what you would picture. Mid-50s, aggressively highlighted blonde hair styled in that specific suburban mom cut that somehow required both a full can of hairspray and an attitude of supreme confidence. She wore white capri pants despite the dirt and ash, a coral-colored blouse, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my truck. She was marching toward me with the determination of a general leading troops into battle. "What do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, loud enough that I actually took a step back. "Are you insane? Are you trying to burn down the entire neighborhood?" I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "I'm conducting a controlled burn on my own property. I have a permit." "A permit?" She said the word like it was something obscene. "A permit does not give you the right to endanger our homes, our families, our property values." That last one really gave away the game, but I tried to remain calm. "Madam, I don't know who you are, but this is my land. I'm well within my legal rights, and I've taken every safety precaution. The fire department knows I'm doing this. The sheriff knows I'm doing this. Everything is under control." "Under control?" She gestured wildly at the small, carefully contained fire burning in a cleared section about 50 yards away. "You call that under control? We can see smoke from our houses. People are terrified." "Then perhaps those people should understand how controlled burns work," I said, my patience already wearing thin. This is standard land management in Colorado. I'm reducing fire hazard, not creating one. A man stepped forward from the crowd, wearing golf attire and an expression of deep concern. Sir, we have a right to feel safe in our community. What you are doing is reckless and irresponsible. Your community, I said slowly, is over there. I pointed toward the Meadowbrook Estates development, clearly visible about a quarter-mile away across an open field. This is my property. You are currently trespassing. Deborah's face flushed red. Trespassing? We are concerned citizens trying to prevent a disaster. I have already called the fire department to report this illegal burning. Then they'll show up, confirm my permit is valid, and tell you to leave my property, I replied, which I'm also telling you to do. Right now, all of you. Nobody moved. Instead, more people seemed to be arriving. I recognized the phenomenon. This was a social media response. Someone had posted in whatever HOA Facebook group these people used, probably with a dramatic photo and an urgent call to action, and now everyone who had nothing better to do on a Tuesday afternoon was showing up to participate in the outrage. A woman in yoga pants was live streaming on her phone. We're here at the scene where a dangerous individual is burning property right next to our family homes, she narrated breathlessly. The HOA is trying to stop him, but he's refusing to listen to reason. I'm refusing to listen to trespassers who have no authority over my property, I corrected, loud enough for her phone to pick up. And if you don't leave in the next 2 minutes, I'm calling the actual police. We already did that too, Deborah announced triumphantly. They're on their way. Great, I said. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to deal with 40 people illegally occupying private property. That was when things escalated. A younger guy, probably early 30s, apparently decided to take matters into his own hands. He grabbed a garden hose that I had staged near the burn site and turned it on, spraying water toward my carefully controlled fire. Hey, I shouted, moving toward him. Stop that right now. You're going to make this worse. He ignored me, playing hero for the crowd. The problem was, he had no idea what he was doing. Controlled burns require specific techniques. You don't just spray water randomly. He was creating steam, spreading ash, and actually causing embers to scatter in ways I had specifically designed the burn to prevent. I reached him and grabbed the hose out of his hands. You're creating the exact hazard you claimed to be preventing, you idiot! He shoved me, hard. I stumbled backward, caught off guard by the sudden physical aggression. The crowd gasped. Several people started shouting. Someone yelled, "Assault!" even though I was the one who had just been shoved. That was when I heard the sirens. 2 Jefferson County Sheriff's vehicles came rolling up my driveway, followed by a fire department truck. The cavalry had arrived, though I was not entirely sure whose side they would be on once Deborah got through spinning her narrative. Deputy Marcus Reeves stepped out of the first vehicle. I recognized him because he had been one of the officers I had coordinated with when filing my burn permit. He took one look at the scene, at the crowd of angry suburbanites, at Deborah already marching toward him with her phone full of evidence, and I saw him suppress a sigh. "Madam," he said, holding up a hand before Deborah could launch into her speech, "I need you to step back and let me assess the situation." "Deputy, this man is conducting illegal burning that threatens our entire community," Deborah announced. "We demand that you arrest him immediately and shut down this dangerous activity." Deputy Reeves ignored her and walked over to me. "Patrick, I assume this is the controlled burn you filed for?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Permit's in my truck if you need to see it again. Everything is contained, following the approved burn plan, and was going fine until these folks showed up and one of them started interfering with the fire safety measures." The deputy looked at the crowd, then at the guy with the hose, then back at me. "Anyone put hands on you?" He shoved me when I took the hose back after he started spraying down the burn site without knowing what he was doing. Deputy Reeves turned to the crowd. "Who sprayed the fire?" There was a moment of silence. Then the young guy, probably realizing he might have messed up, raised his hand reluctantly. "I was trying to help. He was burning down the neighborhood. He has a legal permit to conduct a controlled burn on his own property," Deputy Reeves said flatly. "You are all currently trespassing. You need to leave now." "We have a right to protect our homes," Deborah insisted. "From what?" The deputy was clearly losing patience. "From legal land management. His property is a quarter mile from your development, The burn is contained, and he followed every legal requirement. You have no right to be here. This is private property. A fire captain had joined us now, having inspected the burn site. Everything looks good, he confirmed to the deputy. Proper fire breaks, controlled area, minimal wind. This is textbook stuff, but the smoke. A woman called out from the crowd. Smoke happens when things burn, the fire captain said dryly. That's how fire works. If you're bothered by the smell, close your windows. But this burn is completely legal and safe. Deborah was not backing down. This is harassment of our community. We will be filing complaints with the county, with the state, with whoever we need to contact to shut this down, Deputy Reeves said. In the meantime, everyone needs to leave this property immediately, or you'll be cited for trespassing. I'm not asking again. The crowd began to grumble and reluctantly drift toward their vehicles. But Deborah stood her ground, phone out, furiously typing. I'm documenting all of this. Our HOA has lawyers. You haven't heard the last of this. Looking forward to it, I muttered. As the parade of cars finally started leaving my property, Deputy Reeves pulled me aside. You're going to have problems with these people. I gathered that. I mean ongoing problems. HOAs like this don't let things go. They'll find ways to make your life difficult. They have no authority over my property, I pointed out. Doesn't mean they won't try. Just be careful, keep everything documented, and call us if they trespass again. He paused. And maybe invest in some no trespassing sign, big ones. I took his advice to heart. After the burn was completed safely and successfully over the next several hours, I spent the evening ordering signs, reviewing my property boundaries, and researching HOA overreach horror stories online. What I found was not encouraging. There were countless tales of HOAs harassing adjacent property owners, filing frivolous lawsuits, and generally making life miserable for anyone who didn't bow to their perceived authority. The next morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, formally demanding that I cease all dangerous activities on my property, pay for smoke remediation services for affected homes in their community, and attend a special HOA meeting to address community concerns. The letter was signed by Deborah Finch, president, and included ominous language about legal action if I did not comply. I called my lawyer. His name was Richard Moss, and I had used him for the property purchase. He read the letter over the phone and started laughing. They want you to pay for smoke remediation, he said between chuckles. From a legal controlled burn? Patrick, this is the most ridiculous thing I've seen in months. Can they actually sue me? They can try. Anyone can sue anyone for anything in this country. But they'd lose spectacularly. You own your property free and clear. You're not part of their HOA. You had legal permits, and you were conducting standard land management. They have zero case. So what do? Ignore it. Don't respond. Don't engage. Don't attend their meeting. You owe them nothing. If they actually file a lawsuit, which I doubt they will once they talk to a real lawyer, we'll deal with it then. But my guess is this is just intimidation. I wanted to believe him. I tried to ignore it. I went about my business, working on my property, enjoying the peace and space I had moved out here to find. But Deborah Finch was not the type to give up easily. 3 days after the burn, I was repairing a section of fence when a car pulled up. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who was anywhere else. Patrick Lawson? He called out. That's me. I'm Gregory Stone, attorney representing the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I'd like to discuss a resolution to the recent incident. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over. What kind of resolution? He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. My clients are willing to forego legal action if you agree to certain stipulations regarding activities on your property that may impact the Meadowbrook community. I didn't take the document. Your clients have no authority to stipulate anything about my property. I'm not part of your HOA. Adjacent property owners can be subject to reasonable restrictions when their actions impact an HOA community, he said, though he sounded like he was reciting something he didn't quite believe. Not in Colorado they can't, I replied. I checked. Unless I'm actually violating noise ordinances, environmental laws, or other county regulations, what I do on my land is my business. And I wasn't violating anything. Gregory Stone shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Lawson, I'll be frank with you. I advised my clients that pursuing this matter would be unwise. However, they're quite insistent. Mrs. Finch in particular is determined to establish certain boundaries regarding your property usage. Mrs. Finch can establish boundaries on HOA property, not mine. I understand your position. I'm simply trying to avoid what could become a costly and time-consuming legal battle for everyone involved. There's no battle, I said firmly. I have legal rights to use my property as I see fit within the law. I exercise those rights. End of story. The lawyer sighed. I'll convey your response to my clients. Have a good day, Mr. Lawson. After he left, I immediately called Richard. They sent a lawyer to my property. What did he want? I explained the conversation. Richard was quiet for a moment, then said, they're actually going to do this. They're actually going to be stupid enough to pursue this. So what happens now? Now we wait. If they file, we respond. In the meantime, I want you to document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every time anyone from that HOA sets foot on your property. Photos, videos, written notes with dates and times. Build a record. I started keeping a log. It turned out to be a good decision, because the incidents kept coming. 2 days after the lawyer's visit, someone reported to the county that I was running an illegal junkyard on my property. An inspector had to come out, see that I simply had some old farm equipment stored in my barn, and close the complaint as unfounded. The inspector apologized for wasting my time and mentioned that they had been receiving an unusual number of complaints about my property lately, all from the same source. Then someone reported that I was operating a business without proper permits. Another inspection, another waste of time, another unfounded complaint. Then an anonymous tip to the health department about improper waste disposal. Nothing. The harassment was steady, petty, and clearly coordinated. Every few days, some new county official would show up at my door because the Meadowbrook HOA had filed another bogus complaint. I documented everything, as Richard had instructed, and the county officials became increasingly annoyed with having their time wasted. About 3 weeks after the controlled burn, I received official notice that the Meadowbrook Estates HOA was filing a lawsuit against me. The claims were a mixture of nuisance, negligence, and something about diminished property values due to dangerous activities. It was as ridiculous as Richard had predicted, but it was also real. I was being sued. Don't worry. Richard assured me when we met to discuss the case, this is going to get tossed, but it's going to take time and cost you money, which is exactly what they're hoping for. They want you to give in just to make it stop. I'm not giving in. Good. Because I think we can do better than just defending. I think we can counterclaim for what? Harassment, abuse of process, trespass, interference with property rights. We have documentation of dozens of incidents. If they want to play legal games, we'll play. The lawsuit crawled through the initial stages of litigation. Meanwhile, the HOA's harassment continued. They filed a complaint with the state about my water usage, claiming I was illegally diverting creek water. I wasn't. Another investigation, another waste of everyone's time, but then things took a darker turn. I came home one afternoon to find that someone had dumped trash across my driveway. Not just a bag or two, but a substantial amount of household garbage deliberately spread out to block vehicle access. I took extensive photos, then spent 2 hours cleaning it up. 2 days later, someone cut my fence. A 60-foot section of barbed wire fencing along my eastern property line had been systematically destroyed, and several of the posts had been knocked over. This wasn't vandalism by bored teenagers. This was targeted property damage. I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Reeves came out again, looking troubled as he examined the fence. This is escalating, he said. You think the HOA did this? I think someone did, and you've only got one group of people who seem to have a problem with you. But proving it is going to be hard. I'm installing cameras, I said, all over the property. If they try something else, I'll have evidence. Good idea. Also, I'm going to increase patrols in this area. And Patrick, be careful. When people get this obsessed, they can become unpredictable. I spent the next week installing a comprehensive security camera system. 12 cameras covering every approach to my house and the major areas of my property. Cloud storage, night vision, motion detection, the works. It cost me almost $3,000, but it was worth it for peace of mind. The cameras paid off faster than I expected. 4 days after installation, I got a motion alert on my phone at 2 in the morning. I pulled up the camera feed and saw two figures in dark clothing skulking around my barn. They appeared to be carrying something. I called 911 while pulling on my boots. Two trespassers on my property actively moving around my barn. I have them on camera. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and wait for deputies. I did not stay inside. I grabbed my shotgun, which I owned legally and knew how to use, and went out my back door. I didn't confront the trespassers directly. Instead, I positioned myself where I could see them while remaining in shadow, and I waited. They were spray painting something on my barn wall. I couldn't make out what it said in the darkness, but I could see the movement of their arms, the hiss of the spray cans. They were taking their time, clearly not expecting to be interrupted. When I heard the sirens in the distance, the two figures panicked and ran. They sprinted toward the tree line on the eastern edge of my property, heading in the direction of Meadowbrook Estates. They were fast, but the sheriff's deputies had been close by. Within minutes, I heard shouting, then more commotion. 20 minutes later, Deputy Reeves walked two men in handcuffs out of the woods and into my driveway. I recognized one of them immediately. It was the same young guy who had grabbed my hose during the controlled burn and shoved me. "These your trespassers?" Deputy Reeves asked me. "There are two of them. I saw two people on my cameras. These two say they were just taking a walk at 2 in the morning on my property with spray paint." We walked over to the barn, flashlights illuminating what they had painted on the wall. In large red letters, "Leave or else." Deputy Reeves looked at the two men with disgust. "Just taking a walk, huh?" The young guy from before, whose name turned out to be Tyler Brennan, was trying to look defiant but mostly just looked scared. "He's a danger to the community. Someone has to do something." "So you decided to commit criminal trespass and vandalism?" the deputy asked. "Real smart." The second guy was older, maybe 45, and he was already talking. It was Tyler's idea. He said we needed to send a message that the HOA president said this guy needed to be dealt with. "Shut up, Dennis," Tyler hissed.
"The HOA president told you to vandalize private property?"
Deputy Reeves asked Dennis, his interest clearly piqued. Dennis hesitated, realizing he might have said too much. "Not exactly. She just said that Mr. Lawson was a problem that needed to be resolved." Tyler interpreted that as meaning we should take action. "We're going to need to have a conversation with this HOA president," Deputy Reeves said. He turned to me. "Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely." Tyler and Dennis were arrested and taken away. I spent the next hour giving a statement and providing copies of the security camera footage. Deputy Reeves mentioned that the sheriff's department was becoming very interested in the Meadowbrook HOA's activities, particularly if board members were encouraging residents to commit crimes. The next morning, I woke up to find my story plastered all over local news. Someone had leaked the arrest report to the media, and suddenly, HOA members arrested for vandalizing neighbors' property was a headline. My phone started ringing with reporters wanting interviews. I declined them all and referred everyone to Richard, but the publicity did something interesting. It brought other victims out of the woodwork. I started receiving emails and messages from people who had their own horror stories about the Meadowbrook HOA. Former residents who had been fined into bankruptcy over minor violations. Current residents who were too afraid to speak out but wanted to share their experiences anonymously. Even some current board members who were disgusted with Deborah's increasingly authoritarian behavior. One email in particular caught my attention. It was from a woman named Nicole Palmer who had lived in Meadowbrook for 5 years before finally selling her house at a loss just to escape. She detailed a pattern of harassment, selective enforcement of rules, and financial irregularities in how the HOA budget was managed. She had documentation, spreadsheets, emails, recordings of meetings where Deborah had made questionable statements. I forwarded everything to Richard. "This is bigger than just my case," I told him. "This HOA is corrupt." "Then maybe it's time to go on offense," Richard suggested. "I have a friend who's an investigative journalist. If we can build a solid case of HOA abuse and corruption, we could blow this whole thing wide open." Before I could respond, I got a call from Deputy Reeves. "We arrested Deborah Finch this morning." I sat up straight. "For what?" "Conspiracy to commit vandalism, criminal mischief, and harassment." When we interviewed Tyler and Dennis, They gave us text messages from Deborah explicitly telling them to make Lawson understand he's not welcome here and to do whatever it takes to protect our community. She tried to claim it was just rhetoric, but combined with the pattern of false complaints and the vandalism, the DA felt there was enough for charges. Holy hell, it gets better. We executed a search warrant on HOA records as part of the investigation. We found evidence that Deborah has been embezzling HOA funds. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. That's a whole separate set of charges. The residents are going to lose their minds. They already are. The story hit the news an hour ago. I've got reporters camped outside the Meadowbrook community entrance. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I mostly felt tired. All this insanity, because I had legally burned some brush on my own property. Because one woman couldn't stand the idea that someone nearby wasn't under her control. The lawsuit against me was quietly withdrawn a week later. The HOA's lawyer, Gregory Stone, sent a formal letter of apology and mentioned that he had resigned from representing the association. The new interim board, elected in an emergency meeting after Deborah's arrest, wanted nothing to do with continuing legal action against me. Tyler and Dennis both pleaded guilty to reduced charges and were sentenced to community service and restitution for the damage to my barn. Dennis also received probation. Tyler, who had a previous record, got a month in jail. Deborah Finch's case was more serious. The embezzlement charges alone were substantial, but combined with the conspiracy and harassment charges, she was looking at real prison time. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA was not feeling generous. The case became something of a local sensation, emblematic of HOA overreach and abuse of power. I cooperated with the investigative journalist Richard had connected me with. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was thorough. She interviewed dozens of current and former Meadowbrook residents, reviewed thousands of pages of HOA documents, and uncovered a pattern of abuse that went back years. Deborah had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, using rules selectively to punish people she didn't like while giving passes to her friends. The financial irregularities were extensive. She had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, everything from spa treatments to vacations, all disguised as community management expenses. Sarah's article, which ran in the Denver Post, was devastating. Tyranny in Suburbia. How one HOA president turned a community into her personal kingdom was the headline. It went viral, getting picked up by national news outlets. Suddenly, Meadowbrook Estates was famous for all the wrong reasons. Property values in the development actually did decline, but not because of my controlled burn. They dropped because nobody wanted to buy into a community with such a toxic reputation. The irony was not lost on me. The new HOA board, led by a retired accountant named Tom Richardson who seemed genuinely committed to reform, reached out to me with a formal apology. They asked if there was anything they could do to make amends. I told them they could start by never setting foot on my property again unless invited and by dropping any notion that they had authority over adjacent landowners. Tom agreed immediately. What Deborah did was inexcusable, he said when we met for coffee in Boulder. A lot of us had no idea how bad things had gotten. We just paid our dues and tried to stay out of trouble. But when you started fighting back, and the truth came out, we realized we had let a bully take over our community. How are things now? I asked. Difficult. We're trying to rebuild trust, reform our governance structure, and recover the money Deborah stole. It's going to take years, but at least we're moving in the right direction. And the harassment of non-HOA neighbors? Over, permanently. We've actually revised our bylaws to explicitly state that the HOA has no authority over properties outside our development boundaries. We're trying to be good neighbors, not tyrants. I appreciated his candor. Tom seemed like a decent person who had been stuck in a bad situation. We parted on good terms, and I genuinely hoped the Meadowbrook community could recover. Deborah Finch's trial took place 8 months after her arrest. I attended part of it, curious to see how it would unfold. She had maintained her innocence throughout, claiming she was being persecuted for being a strong leader who made tough decisions. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a dedicated volunteer who had made some minor mistakes in judgment, but whose heart was in the right place. The prosecution destroyed that narrative. They presented evidence of systematic embezzlement. Witness after witness detailing harassment and abuse, and the text messages explicitly encouraging vandalism of my property. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all major counts. At sentencing, the judge was blunt. Mrs. Finch, you were given a position of trust within your community, and you abused that trust in every way possible. You stole from your neighbors, you harassed and intimidated anyone who questioned you. You even encouraged criminal activity against a completely innocent man whose only crime was exercising his legal rights on his own property. Your behavior was not leadership, it was tyranny, and it will not be tolerated. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison for the embezzlement and conspiracy charges, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to me for my legal fees and property damage. Given her assets had been largely frozen, I didn't expect to see much of that money, but the principle mattered more than the cash. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure. This entire absurd situation had started because I wanted to responsibly manage my property and had ended with an HOA president going to prison. It was a wild journey and one I would have gladly avoided, but I couldn't deny there was satisfaction in seeing justice served. Life returned to normal after that, or at least as normal as things get when you own 23 acres of Colorado land. I continued my property management work, including another controlled burn the following spring. This time, nobody showed up to panic. I received no angry letters, no bogus complaints, no midnight vandals. The Meadowbrook HOA stayed on their side of the property line, and I stayed on mine. I did install a permanent sign at the entrance to my driveway, though. It read, "Private property. No trespassing. This means you, Karen." It was petty, I'll admit, but after everything I had been through, I felt entitled to a little pettiness. Nicole Palmer, the woman who had sent me the initial documentation about HOA abuses, became a friend. She had moved to a rural property about 10 miles from mine, having learned the same lesson I had about the value of space and independence. We would occasionally meet for coffee and swap stories about our escapes from suburban tyranny. You know what the craziest part is? Nicole said to me one afternoon as we sat on my porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Deborah actually believed she was the victim in all this. Right up until the end, she thought she was the one being persecuted. People like that always do, I replied. They can't comprehend that rules apply to them too, or that other people have rights that matter just as much as their preferences. Did you ever regret fighting back instead of just giving in? I thought about it. No. If I had given in, she would have just escalated. People like Deborah interpret compliance as weakness and weakness as invitation. The only way to deal with a bully is to stand your ground, even when it costs you time, money, and peace of mind, even then. Because the alternative is living under someone else's thumb, and I didn't move out here for that. The Meadowbrook community did eventually recover, though it took several years. Property values stabilized once the new board established a track record of reasonable governance. Several families who had been driven out by Deborah's reign actually moved back. The development became known not for its scandal, but for its reform, which was a better legacy than anyone had expected. As for me, I became something of a minor celebrity in anti-HOA circles. I gave a few interviews about my experience, always emphasizing the importance of knowing your rights and standing up to overreach. I heard from people all over the country dealing with similar situations, and I tried to offer what advice I could. The most rewarding conversation I had was with a young couple in Florida who were being harassed by their HOA over a vegetable garden. They were terrified and ready to give up. I walked them through the process of documenting everything, researching their legal rights, and finding a good attorney. 6 months later, they emailed me to say they had won their case, and the HOA had been forced to change their rules. It felt good to help someone else escape the kind of nightmare I had endured. I also became more involved in local land rights advocacy. Jefferson County had several ongoing debates about property use regulations, and I found myself testifying at county commissioner meetings, arguing for the rights of landowners to manage their property responsibly without excessive interference. My experience gave me credibility, and I like to think I made a difference in a few policy decisions. The controlled burns themselves became routine. Every year, I filed my permits, notified the proper authorities, and carefully managed the fire risk on my property. The fire department actually started using my burns as training opportunities, bringing new recruits out to watch and learn proper technique. I was happy to help, and it was nice to have professional supervision to ensure everything went perfectly. I never saw Deborah Finch again after the sentencing. I heard through the grapevine that she served her full 3 years, maintained her innocence throughout, and was released to probation in a different part of the state. Some people never learn, never grow, never accept responsibility for their actions. I hoped prison had changed her, but I doubted it. People that deep into their own righteousness rarely find their way out. The legal bills from the whole ordeal were substantial, even with the restitution order. Richard estimated I spent about $40,000 total on legal fees, security systems, and property repairs. It was a lot of money, but I had budgeted for it, and more importantly, I could sleep at night knowing I hadn't compromised my principles or my rights. One unexpected positive came from the whole situation. The publicity around the case led to me being contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to do a piece about HOA overreach in America. I agreed to participate, along with Nicole and several other Meadowbrook residents. The documentary, titled The Kingdom Next Door, aired on a streaming platform and got decent viewership. It sparked conversations about HOA reform and helped raise awareness about the potential for abuse in these organizations. I also started writing. Just a blog at first, documenting my experiences and offering advice to others dealing with similar situations. But it grew into something bigger. A publisher reached out and asked if I would be interested in expanding it into a book. I spent a year working on it and burning down the HOA. One Man's Fight Against Suburban Tyranny was published to modest but respectable sales. I never made the bestseller list, but I got enough positive feedback from readers to know I had helped people. And that mattered more than money. The most important thing I learned from the whole experience was the value of community, real community, not the artificial kind enforced by HOA bylaws. My neighbors on the other rural properties around me, the ones who actually understood land management and respected property rights, became good friends. We helped each other with projects, watched out for each other's property, and built the kind of genuine relationships that can't be mandated by rules and regulations. There was old Frank Martinez, who owned 40 acres to my north and had been ranching in Colorado for 50 years. He taught me more about sustainable land management in a few conversations than I could have learned from a dozen books. When I needed help moving some heavy equipment, Frank showed up with his tractor and his grandson, and we got the job done in an afternoon. There was Jennifer Kowalski, a wildlife biologist who owned 15 acres to my west and ran a small animal rehabilitation center. She helped me understand how my land management decisions affected local wildlife and taught me techniques for preserving habitat while still maintaining fire safety. We collaborated on creating wildlife corridors that benefited both our properties. These were the kinds of neighbors worth having. People who understood mutual respect, who valued independence while still being willing to help when needed, who solved problems through conversation rather than litigation. Looking back on the whole saga, from that first controlled burn to Deborah's sentencing and beyond, I recognized it as a defining period of my life. It tested me in ways I hadn't expected and forced me to become a stronger, more resilient person. It also confirmed that I had made the right choice in leaving Denver and buying this property. The peace and freedom I had been seeking were worth fighting for. On the anniversary of that first controlled burn, the one that had triggered the entire chain of events, I decided to commemorate it with another burn. This time, I invited people. Frank and his family came. Jennifer brought some volunteers from her rehab center. Tom Richardson from the reformed Meadowbrook HOA asked if he could attend with a few board members as a learning experience about proper land management. I agreed. We made it into a community event. I explained the science behind controlled burns, demonstrated the safety measures, and let people ask questions. The fire department sent a crew to supervise and educate. It turned into an impromptu workshop on fire ecology and responsible land stewardship. As I watched the carefully controlled flames consuming dead brush and renewing the soil, surrounded by friends and neighbors who respected what I was doing rather than feared it, I felt a sense of completion. This was what I had wanted all along. Not conflict, not drama, not headlines. Just the simple right to manage my property responsibly and live in peace. After everyone left and the burn was safely completed, I sat on my porch as the sun set, a beer in my hand and my dog sprawled at my feet. The mountains loomed purple in the distance, and the evening air carried the clean smell of wood smoke and fresh earth. This was home, this was freedom, and it had been worth every moment of struggle to defend it. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Saw your social media posts about the community burn. Looks like things have come full circle. Proud of you, man. I smiled and typed back. Thanks for everything. Could not have done this without you. That's what lawyers are for. Well, good lawyers anyway. Enjoy your evening. I did enjoy it. I enjoyed the peace, the space, the knowledge that I had stood up for what was right and won. Not just in court, but in the broader sense of building the life I wanted and refusing to let anyone take it away. The Meadowbrook community continued its recovery and reform. I would occasionally see Tom at local events, and he would update me on their progress. They had implemented term limits for board members, established better financial oversight, and created an appeals process for residents who felt they were being treated unfairly. They were trying to become what an HOA should be, a tool for maintaining community standards through consensus and respect, not a weapon for petty tyrants to wield against their neighbors. Some former residents even sued the HOA for past abuses, and several of those cases settled favorably. The insurance company that covered the HOA's liability was not happy about the payouts and forced even more reforms as a condition of continued coverage. It turned out that Deborah's reign of terror was expensive in more ways than one. As for my property, it thrived. The controlled burns reduced fire risk and promoted healthier growth. I planted native grasses and wildflowers in the cleared areas, which attracted more diverse wildlife. Jennifer documented several species returning to my land that hadn't been seen in the area for years. I installed bat houses and bird nesting boxes. I created a small pond that became a watering hole for deer and other animals. The property became a showcase for sustainable land management, and I started giving occasional tours to school groups and conservation organizations. It was rewarding to share what I had learned and to inspire others to think carefully about how they interacted with the land. I also finally finished all the major renovation work on my house. It had taken 3 years, but the old farmhouse was now properly insulated, updated, and comfortable while still retaining its historical character. I had done most of the work myself, learning carpentry, plumbing, and electrical skills as I went. There was deep satisfaction in living in a home I had rebuilt with my own hands. Life settled into a rhythm. I worked from home as a software consultant, which gave me the flexibility to manage my property and pursue my advocacy work. I dated occasionally, but was in no rush to settle down. I had learned to value my independence and wasn't interested in compromising it unless I found someone who truly understood and shared my values. The security cameras I had installed during the conflict remained active, but they mostly just captured wildlife and the occasional delivery driver. I kept them running partly for security and partly because they provided entertaining footage. I had hours of videos of deer, elk, foxes, and even a black bear that occasionally wandered through. I started a YouTube channel sharing some of the better wildlife clips, which developed a small but dedicated following. The book royalties provided some extra income, enough that I could donate to causes I cared about. I supported land rights advocacy groups, legal defense funds for property owners fighting HOA overreach, and conservation organizations working to preserve open spaces in Colorado. It felt good to turn my negative experience into something positive for others. I also reconnected with old friends from Denver who I had lost touch with after moving. When they visited and saw my property, saw the life I had built, most of them understood why I had made the choices I did. A few even admitted they were jealous and were considering their own escapes from city life. Years passed. The Meadowbrook scandal faded from public memory, replaced by newer controversies and dramas. Deborah finished her prison sentence and disappeared from public view. The community she had once ruled became just another suburban development, indistinguishable from dozens of others in the area except for those who knew its history. But I never forgot. Every time I filed a burn permit, Every time I saw those no trespassing signs at the edge of my property, every time I dealt with any kind of bureaucracy or authority, I remembered the lesson I had learned. Rights mean nothing if you're not willing to defend them. I thought about writing a sequel to my book, focusing on the aftermath and the long-term effects of standing up to institutional bullying. But I decided against it. I had said what I needed to say. Besides, I was more interested in living my life than documenting it. The property continued to be my sanctuary. My project, my legacy. I planted an orchard of fruit trees and started keeping bees. I built a workshop where I could pursue woodworking and other hobbies. I created trails through the property for hiking and mounted a series of trail cameras to monitor wildlife movements. Every year brought new projects, new improvements, new ways to make the land more productive and beautiful. And every spring I conducted my controlled burn, properly permitted and safely executed, maintaining the health of the land and reducing fire risk. It had become a ritual, a marker of the year, and a reminder of how far I had come since that first burn that had triggered such chaos. Sometimes, when I was working outside, I would see people from Meadowbrook driving slowly past my property, looking at the land with what seemed like curiosity or even envy. I wondered what they were thinking. Did they wish they had more space? Did they resent their HOA restrictions? Did they remember the scandal that had engulfed their community? I would never know, and it didn't really matter. They lived their lives, and I lived mine, and as long as they stayed on their side of the property line, we could coexist peacefully. That was the real lesson, I supposed, not that HOAs were inherently evil, or that all suburban living was soul-crushing, but that people needed to find the living situation that matched their values and temperament. For some people, the structure and uniformity of an HOA community was comforting. They liked knowing exactly what was expected, what the rules were, what their neighbors could and couldn't do. For people like me, that same structure felt suffocating. I needed space, autonomy, the freedom to make my own decisions about my own property. Neither approach was wrong, but they were incompatible. The tragedy of the Deborah Finch situation was not just her corruption and bullying, but her inability to recognize that not everyone wanted or needed to live under her authority. She had tried to extend her control beyond its legitimate boundaries, and the collision between her need for control and my need for freedom had been inevitable. In the end, freedom won, as it usually does when people are willing to fight for it, but it required fighting, required standing firm, required refusing to give in to intimidation and harassment. That was the part that bothered me most about the whole situation. Justice shouldn't require that much effort. People shouldn't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars and months of stress to defend their basic property rights. But sometimes they do, and when that moment comes, the only choice is to stand and fight or to surrender and live with the consequences. I had chosen to stand, and I had won, and my life was better for it. My property was thriving, my community was genuine, and I woke up every morning in a place I loved, doing work I enjoyed, living exactly the life I had chosen. That was worth more than any amount of conflict or struggle. As I sat on my porch on another peaceful evening, watching the last light fade from the sky and the stars begin to emerge, I felt profound gratitude. Gratitude for this land, for the people who had helped me defend it, for the legal system that had ultimately worked as it should, and for the lessons learned through adversity. The controlled burn that had started everything was long since cold, its ashes scattered and incorporated back into the soil, nourishing new growth. But the fire it had ignited, the one that had burned away the pretense that HOAs had unlimited authority and that bullies could intimidate with impunity, that fire still burned. It burned in the reformed governance of Meadowbrook Estates. It burned in the advocacy work I continued to do. It burned in the lives of people who had read my story and found courage to stand up for their own rights. And it would keep burning, because that's what fire does when it's properly tended. It clears away the dead growth, making room for new life. It renews the soil and prepares it for the next season. It's destructive and creative at the same time, a force of nature that respects no authority except the laws of physics and chemistry. I had started a controlled burn on my own land, legally and responsibly. The HOA had shown up in a panic, trying to assert authority they didn't have over property they didn't own, and in the end, Their whole corrupt structure had burned down while my land grew healthier and stronger. There was poetry in that, I supposed. The kind of rough justice that made for good stories and important lessons. The kind that reminded people that rights matter, that laws mean something, and that standing up to bullies is always worth the cost. My 23 acres in Jefferson County, Colorado had become more than just property. They had become a testament to the importance of defending what's yours and living life on your own terms. And that was exactly what I intended to keep doing, for as long as I owned this land and drew breath. The HOA had shown up in a panic once, and they had learned a lesson they would never forget. I had learned a few lessons too, about strength, perseverance, and the value of standing your ground. Those lessons had made me who I was, and I was grateful for them, even if the way I learned them had been difficult. The stars shone brighter here than they ever had in Denver, undimmed by city lights and suburban sprawl. I could see the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, ancient and eternal. This was the view I had wanted, the life I had fought for, the freedom I had defended. And it was worth every moment of struggle, every dollar spent, every sleepless night worrying about lawsuits and vandalism and harassment, because in the end, I had won, not just in court, but in the way that really mattered. I had built the life I wanted and refused to let anyone take it away. And that victory, quiet and personal as it was, meant everything.